Frost crusted the edges of the primary thermal vent. Instead of the expected roar of recycled warmth, the intake hummed with a hollow, biting chill. Never had the proctors of the Domestication Academy seen a heating unit fail during an intake session. His data slate Zovok gripped with trembling digits, tail coiled tight in a fear knot. Beside the observation glass, the High Proctor tapped his upper left chest plate twice, a rhythmic gesture of supreme confidence. They were the masters of the Deathworlders, the architects of 1,000 tamed species. Today, the prize was a small specimen from Earth. Across the sterile intake floor, Nova walked with a gait that Zovok found disturbingly steady. In her right hand, she clutched a single glass marble, rolling the sphere between her palms as if seeking comfort from the cold. Occasionally, her index finger tapped her thumb in a precise, measured circle. To Zovok, it looked like a tick of impending psychological collapse. The Academy thought they understood her limits. You'll want to hear how she turned their greatest weapon into a child's toy. Stay with me. She did not look like a predator. Adjust the output to 40%. The High Proctor commanded, his voice a gravelly rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. Zovok hesitated, noting the unusual energy draw on the primary thermal sinks. Sir, the internal sensors are reporting an unprecedented local vacuum in the heat exchange. A sharp, dismissive grunt was the only reply. According to the Academy's archives, the processor functioned by bombarding a subject with focused microwave radiation while simultaneously stripping the atmosphere of moisture. It was a perfect furnace of despair. No carbon-based life form could endure the molecular friction for more than 5 minutes without a total neural shutdown. Nova sat in the center of the white-lit floor, her eyes closed and her breathing rhythmic. Zovok recognized the signs immediately, the submission trance. Her species was conceding, folding their spirit before the majesty of Academy technology. It was a common sight, yet something about the way her thumb continued that circular motion made the hair on Zovok's neck rise. Inside the chamber, the air began to shimmer with the intensity of the thermal load, turning the environment into a distorted, golden haze. Zovok watched the gauges on his slate spike into the red, expecting the human to finally slump over as the radiation cooked the very air in her lungs. Instead, the frost on the external vents only grew thicker, spreading like white veins across the glass until the observers were forced to squint against the glare. Echoed through the maintenance shafts a low, metallic groan. It was a sound of agony, but it didn't come from the human. The processor, a machine that had operated for 3 centuries without a single mechanical fault, was vibrating with such violence that Zovok's teeth began to ache. Something was fundamentally wrong with the energy flow. The girl, Zovok whispered, his twitchy tail lashing the air. She isn't the one breaking. The High Proctor leaned forward, his confident chest tapping replaced by a stiff, predatory stillness. On the floor of the chamber, Nova had stopped her circular thumb motion. The marble she held up to the white-hot light glowed with a serene, terrifying light. The temperature is dropping, the proctor muttered, staring at the frost. He checked the internal comms and frowned. She's complaining the air is finally almost comfortable. From the core of the machine, a scent of ozone and scorched copper filled the observation deck. Zovok watched the human, her skin now shimmering with a thin layer of perspiration that seemed to catch the golden light. He assumed it was the moisture of a body entering the final stages of thermal shock. The resonance is peaking, the High Proctor shouted over the mounting din. His 4 arms braced against the console. Once more he tapped his chest plate, though the gesture now lacked its usual rhythm. For the first time in his career, he looked at a subject with something other than clinical detachment. He looked with the dawning realization that the prey was not behaving according to the manual. Beyond the reinforced glass, Nova finally opened her eyes. They were not glazed with the dullness of the broken. They were sharp, focused, and intensely blue. She adjusted the cuff of her oversized jumpsuit, a small habit that seemed absurdly normal amidst the screaming machinery. Zovok checked his slate, tapping the screen to refresh the temperature data one last time. The numbers were impossible. The core was hot enough to liquefy obsidian, Yet the girl sat within a pocket of perfectly stable air. Behind the heat, she was doing something else entirely. Nova reached into the white-hot core and pulled out a sphere of liquid light. Zovok's breath hitched. This was no submission. The trance he had observed was not the surrender of a mind, but the intense, localized concentration of a master craftsman. He saw her reach into the pocket of her jumpsuit, her fingers brushing against a small, scorched block of wood. It was an old paddle, weathered and blackened by years of shaping molten things. "You know," Nova said, her voice carrying through the comms with terrifying clarity, "glass isn't actually a solid. It's an amorphous solid. A liquid that just forgot how to flow until you give it enough energy." Came the sound of the primary stabilizer shattering. The machine, designed to rewrite the soul of a Deathworlder, finally succumbed to its own hijacked power. High Proctor and technician alike watched as the human began to blow into the sphere of light, using her breath to expand the liquid fire. She wasn't being tested by the Academy. She was using their multi-billion credit stress tester as a glorified kiln. Zovok realized then that their classification was a lie. The Academy had spent centuries perfecting domestication through trauma. They believed that by applying enough pressure, any creature would eventually take the shape they desired. But humanity didn't break under pressure. They waited for the heat to become sufficient, and then they chose their own shape. The machine gave one final, tectonic shudder before falling silent. The golden haze dissipated, leaving behind a chamber filled with cooling, gray smoke and the scent of rain. Nova stood up, her jumpsuit slightly singed but her posture unbroken. In the center of the melted core sat a single glass marble. It was no longer dull or cold. Trapped inside the clear, spherical depths was a swirling vortex of orange and gold, a captured miniature sun that pulsed with the energy she had harvested. She walked toward the observation glass, her boots crunching on the frost-cracked floor. Zovok stood frozen as she stopped just inches from his face. She didn't scream. She didn't threaten. She simply looked at him with a tired, knowing smile. Nova turned and walked toward the exit, her hand resting on the scorched wooden block in her pocket. On the pedestal, the marble continued to glow, casting a long shadow across the ruined machine. The clear glass held the heat of the furnace. A single, perfect sphere of light sat in the dark. End of story.